The explosion at Grey Sloan Memorial wasn't just another tragedy, it was the moment that changed everything. Within seconds, chaos swallowed the hospital, friendships were shattered, and lives were hanging by a thread. As smoke filled the corridors and alarms screamed through the halls, one thing became clear: no one was safe. This wasn't just another day in Seattle's most dramatic hospital. It was the beginning of a nightmare that would leave every doctor questioning their choices, their loyalties, and their future. The opening of Grey's Anatomy Season 22 didn't just shock viewers. It ripped open old wounds and forced everyone to face what comes after the unthinkable. Grey Sloan Memorial had seen pain before: shootings, plane crashes, pandemics, but never something like this. The moment the gas valve burst, fire consumed the walls faster than anyone could react. Meredith Grey, watching helplessly from outside, could see her life's work collapsing in front of her eyes. The same walls where she learned to heal were now burning, trapping her friends and colleagues inside. And as the fire raged on, every second became a countdown to heartbreak. Inside the hospital, chaos reigned. Lucas Adams sprinted through the smoke-filled corridors, shouting for help as alarms echoed. Richard Webber took command, ordering an immediate lockdown to stop the fire from spreading. But it was too late. Parts of the ceiling were already collapsing. The power flickered, monitors went dead, and the elevators stopped working, trapping patients and doctors on multiple floors. The smell of smoke, blood, and panic filled the air. Then came the moment that sent chills through every viewer. Atticus Link Lincoln, struck by debris, fell to the ground as a sharp piece of the ceiling pierced his collarbone. He was bleeding heavily, his breathing ragged. Miranda Bailey and Owen Hunt rushed to his side, their faces pale with fear. Bailey shouted for Ben Warren, her husband, who was already pushing through the chaos, carrying a stretcher with trembling hands. "We need to move him now!" she yelled. But with the elevators out and the hallways blocked, there was nowhere to go. Link was slipping fast. His vision blurred, and he whispered weakly, "Don't tell Joe," before passing out. Bailey's hands shook as she pressed down on the wound, trying to stop the bleeding, while Owen scanned the room for anything that could be used as a tourniquet. Every second counted, and the weight of the situation pressed down on everyone. This wasn't just another surgery, this was one of their own. A friend, a father, fighting to stay alive. Outside, Meredith couldn't stand still. The police had blocked the entrance, insisting it wasn't safe. But that didn't matter to her. She had faced death before, and she wasn't about to let anyone she loved die while she waited. With one fierce motion, she shattered the glass door with a nearby object, stepping into the inferno. "The clinic is open!" she declared, her voice steady but filled with fury. It was the line that defined the moment. Grey Sloan was back in her hands, even if it meant walking through fire. Meanwhile, Teddy Altman coordinated the trauma team, her voice shaking but firm as she directed the incoming patients. She locked eyes with Ben Warren, who was covered in soot and blood, and for a moment, time froze. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, remembering how he'd left medicine before. Ben looked at her and simply said, "I'm right where I need to be." It was a quiet, powerful reminder that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear scrubs soaked in sweat and fear. Down the hall, Jules Millen was faced with the most terrifying decision of her career. A 6-year-old patient lay before her, pale and still, with internal bleeding that was getting worse by the minute. Monica Beltran, injured but refusing to stop, guided her through every step. "We're running out of anesthesia," Monica said through gritted teeth. "But if you don't open him up now, he won't make it." Jules froze, her hands trembling. "This isn't a simulation," Monica reminded her. "This is real. You either save him or you watch him die." The weight of those words hit Jules like a storm. She pushed through her panic, remembering every lesson, every night spent in the lab, and made the first incision. The room was silent except for the sound of her own heartbeat. Blood pooled on the table, and the tension was unbearable. When the bleeding finally stopped, Jules looked up, only to see Monica collapse beside her. Equipment had fallen on her earlier, and now her body had given up. Jules screamed for help, performing CPR with tears streaming down her face, but Monica's eyes never opened again. In that moment, the cost of being a doctor became painfully clear. Saving one life meant losing another. And as the hospital burned, grief spread like the flames. uncontrollable and devastating. Jules stumbled out of the OR, sobbing, her hands shaking, her scrub stained with blood that wasn't hers. Winston and Dugu caught her, holding her close as she broke down. His eyes were heavy. He knew what she'd just lost, but there was no time to grieve. Somewhere else in the building, Link's heart monitor began to flatline. Bailey screamed for the crash cart. Owen pressed down on his chest, counting under his breath. "Come on, Link! Don't you dare leave her now," Bailey whispered. The beeping returned, faint but there. He was alive, barely. The entire OR exhaled at once. But the danger wasn't over. The fire was spreading again, and they were running out of time. By the time the flames were finally contained, the hospital was in ruins. Walls were blackened, equipment destroyed, and silence replaced the chaos. Meredith stood in the center of it all, surrounded by ashes and broken glass, her eyes distant. Grey Sloan Memorial, her home, her heart, had survived, but not without scars. And as the sun rose over Seattle, it was clear this was only the beginning. Something had changed forever. The chaos may have ended, but the silence that followed was even more haunting. Grey Sloan Memorial stood half in ruins, with smoke still curling through the halls like a ghost that refused to leave. The air was thick with loss. Every breath felt heavier, every heartbeat louder. The doctors were exhausted, covered in blood and ash, moving through the wreckage like soldiers after battle. But for one of them, the fight wasn't over yet. Link was barely clinging to life. His pulse was weak, his skin pale, and every breath came out in broken gasps. Bailey stood over him, her gloves trembling, her eyes locked on the monitor that refused to stabilize. "We're not losing him," she muttered under her breath, determination burning through her exhaustion. Owen adjusted the bandages, his hands steady but his jaw tight. They both knew what it meant. If Link didn't get into surgery soon, he wouldn't make it. But with the power grid still unstable and half the operating rooms destroyed, there was nowhere to operate. Then came the moment that tore at every viewer's heart. Bailey pulled out her phone and placed it in Link's weak hand. "If there's anything you need to say," she whispered, "say it now." Link's eyes fluttered open for a second, barely able to focus. His voice was soft, broken, but filled with emotion as he spoke. "Tell Joe, I cherish you. Love our children. I'm sorry it took me so long to say it." His words cracked, and for a second it felt like the life was slipping right out of him. "It's gonna be okay," he whispered again, as if trying to convince himself. "But just in case, my password book's in the second left drawer of my desk. And Joe, get a dog." The phone fell from his hand. The silence that followed was unbearable. Bailey's hands moved faster, pressing down on his chest as Owen called for the defibrillator. "Charging!" he yelled, the room filled with the sound of electricity and desperation. One shock, 2, 3, then a faint beep. His heart started again. Bailey exhaled, tears welling in her eyes, whispering, "That's it, Lincoln. Don't you dare quit now." Meanwhile, outside the trauma ward, Jo Wilson sat on the floor clutching her phone, tears streaming down her face. She'd heard every word. The chaos around her didn't matter. In that moment, her world had narrowed to a single voice fading in and out. She was pregnant, fragile, terrified. Her shaking hands clutched her stomach as she whispered, "You promised me you'd come home." The sound of sirens outside echoed like a cruel reminder that nothing in this hospital, or in life, was ever guaranteed. Elsewhere, Amelia Shepard stood frozen near the ICU window, staring through the glass at Link's unconscious body. Her hands trembled, her breath hitched. Every instinct told her to rush in, to help, to fight for him. But her mind screamed at her to stay back. She'd been told to leave. Her presence was chaos in a room that needed order. "Get her out of here right now!" Alvin had shouted earlier when she panicked. Those words still echoed in her mind, replaying over and over like a wound that refused to close. As she turned away, her voice broke. "I lost my father when I was a child," she whispered to no one. "My life was defined by his absence." I don't want that for Scout. The pain in her eyes was raw, almost unbearable. She wasn't just watching a man fight for his life. She was watching her family's future hang in the balance. Downstairs, Ben Warren had taken charge of triage, his face streaked with sweat and soot. When he heard Link had stabilized, he closed his eyes for a moment, whispering a quiet thank you. But his relief was short-lived. He had been running on instinct all night, saving lives, ignoring his own exhaustion. Teddy Altman approached him, wiping blood from her hands. "You took a risk," she said. Her tone was firm, but not unkind. "You left your residency once. You didn't have to come back." Ben looked at her, eyes tired but resolute. "I was a lot like you once," she continued softly. "I used to take chances, make decisions from the gut. I second-guessed everything. Then I put on this suit, and I became careful. Too careful." She paused, her voice thickening with emotion. "Don't let this place change you like it did me." Ben nodded, silent, the weight of her words settling deep. For him, this wasn't about proving himself. It was about redemption, about finally being where he was meant to be, in the fight, beside his people, when they needed him most. But the night had one more heartbreak waiting. Jules Mellin, still trembling for Monica's death, was sitting in the corridor, staring blankly at her bloodied gloves. Winston approached carefully, his voice calm. "You did what you had to do," he said. Jules shook her head. "I killed her," she whispered. "If I hadn't frozen—" "You saved that boy," Winston interrupted. "Monica knew the risks. She believed in you." Those words broke her. Tears streamed down her face as she buried her head in her hands. "Then why doesn't it feel like I did something good?" she sobbed. Winston looked at her, eyes full of quiet understanding. "Because in this place," he said, "every victory costs something." The words lingered like a shadow. When dawn broke over Seattle, the hospital was eerily quiet. Meredith stood outside, her eyes scanning the smoke-stained building. She could hear the faint hum of generators, the distant chatter of firefighters, and the sound of her own heart pounding. Inside, lives had been saved, others lost. And for the doctors of Grey Sloan Memorial, nothing would ever be the same. But even in the ruins, there was something unbreakable. The spirit that had carried them through every disaster before. They had survived again, but this time the scars ran deeper. And as Meredith walked through the shattered glass doors, she knew that survival came with a cost. One they'd all be paying for a long time. The smoke had cleared, but Grey Sloan Memorial was still drowning in silence. The kind of silence that settles after disaster. Heavy, suffocating, filled with everything left unsaid. The once bustling corridors were now lined with stretchers, broken equipment, and faces that couldn't hide the pain anymore. Every doctor had blood on their scrubs, and every heart carried the weight of what they'd lost. Joe Wilson sat beside Link's hospital bed, her fingers tracing the edge of the sheet where his hand rested. Machines beeped rhythmically beside him, each sound a cruel reminder that he was alive, but barely. His face was pale, almost ghostly, with bandages wrapped across his chest. She whispered softly, her voice shaking, "You don't get to leave me." Not after everything. The twins inside her moved as if sensing her fear, and for a moment, Joe let herself cry. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet sobs that come when strength finally runs out. In the hallway, Miranda Bailey leaned against the wall, watching through the glass. She'd spent her entire career teaching others how to stay calm under pressure, how to make impossible choices. But nothing prepared her for nights like this. "That man refused to give up," she murmured to herself, remembering how Link's heart had flatlined again and again before coming back. He wasn't leaving her. Not tonight. When Joe looked up and met her eyes through the glass, Bailey gave a small nod. No words were needed. It was the silent bond of two women who had both seen too much, who both understood the cost of survival. Elsewhere in the hospital, Amelia Shepherd wandered through the recovery wing, her hands shoved into her pockets, her mind spiraling. She couldn't stop replaying it. Link bleeding out, her being pulled away, the sound of the monitor flatlining. Every memory was a blade twisting in her chest. She stopped at a window, staring out into the early morning light breaking through the smoke. "Why is it always us?" she whispered. The reflection staring back at her looked like a stranger. Tired, broken, and haunted. Then came the voice that shattered the silence. "Because we keep fighting," Meredith said softly, stepping up beside her. Amelia turned, her eyes filled with tears. "He almost died, Mare. I thought he was gone. And I couldn't even be there." Meredith placed a hand on her shoulder. "You were there," she said quietly. "You always are." That's who you are, Amelia, even when it hurts. But Jules couldn't accept that yet. The sound of Monica's voice, calm, steady, unbreakable, echoed in her mind. Unless you want to watch that little boy die. Those were her last words. Jules broke down again, covering her face with her trembling hands. Winston stayed beside her, silent. Sometimes silence said more than words ever could. As the hospital slowly came back to life, Teddy Altman gathered the remaining surgeons in the conference room. Her face was pale, her voice steady, but heavy with sorrow. "We've lost one of our own," she began, and the room fell completely silent. Every heart in that room already knew who she meant, but hearing it made it real. Dr. Monica Beltran passed during surgery. She saved a child's life before Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. She was a brilliant surgeon, a mentor, and a friend. We owe her everything. For a moment, no one spoke. Bailey bowed her head. Meredith closed her eyes. Jo wiped her tears. The air was thick with grief, but also pride. Pride in the woman who gave her life doing what she loved. Teddy continued, her voice quieter now. She'll be remembered not just for her skill, but for her courage. Grey Sloan has seen tragedy before, but this one hurts. Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds, its light cutting through the haze that still hung over the hospital. It should have felt like hope, but it didn't. Not yet. Later that afternoon, Meredith stood in the courtyard, watching firefighters roll away their hoses and ambulances drive off. The once busy heart of Grey Sloan Memorial was now a quiet shell. She looked up at the damaged building, scorched, broken, but still standing. "You've been through worse," she whispered to herself, as if speaking to the hospital. Richard Weber joined her, his face weary. "You really think we can fix all this?" he asked. Meredith didn't look away from the building. "We have to," she said simply, "because if we don't, who will?" And that was the thing about Grey Sloan. It always came back, no matter how much it hurt, no matter how much it lost. The doctors who walked its halls weren't just surgeons, they were survivors. But this time, even survival came with a price. As the day ended, Jo sat beside Link again, whispering to him softly. "You said it's going to be okay," she murmured. "Then you'd better make it true." She brushed his hand with hers, her eyes red but full of determination. "We've come too far to stop now." And for just a moment, just enough to make hearts skip across the world, Link's fingers twitched. His hand moved, weak but unmistakable. Jo gasped, tears spilling over as she whispered, "You're still fighting." The beeping of the monitor grew stronger, steadier. It was faint, but it was there, the sound of hope refusing to die. Grey Sloan Memorial had survived another tragedy, but this one would leave scars deeper than anyone could imagine. And as night fell again over Seattle, one truth echoed through every hallway, every broken wall, and every heart that still dared to beat. Nothing would ever be the same again.